Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fourth installment of the CxEnergy virtual experience. These webinars are presented by the ABC Commissioning Group, as well as its sister organizations, the Associated Air Balance Council and the Energy Management Association. For those of you on the line who don't know me, I'm Sam Schwartz, and I'm a Member Engagement and Marketing Manager for ACG, ABC, and EMA. Since we were unable to have CxEnergy in person this year, we're hoping to bring you as much of the commissioning, energy management, and testing related education as we can through a combination of these live webinars as well as some additional pre-recorded sessions. I do just have a few quick notes before we get started. We encourage you to submit questions at any time using the questions tab on the left-hand side of your screen. But while doing so, please make sure to submit questions to the questions box and not the general chat box. A few will be selected to answer at the end of the webinar, and any that can't be answered will be responded to via email afterward. Also on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see the Resources tab, where you can download a PDF of today's slides. There's also a Notes tab on the right-hand side of your screen, where you can make notes on today's webinar, and those will be emailed to you automatically at the end of the presentation. If you happen to be experiencing technical problems during the webinar, please click on the Request Support button on the lower left side of the player. Finally, in terms of continuing education credit, you will receive an email after the webinar with instructions on how to get your proof of attendance. We're going to be asking you to check into these sessions through the CxEnergy app to automate that process. Continuing the virtual experience today is Children's Hospital of Atlanta case study, highly effective commissioning, with your speakers Jacob Terry of CxAlloy and John McFarland of WorkingBuildings. Thank you again for joining us, everyone. And with that, I'll hand it off to our presenters.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everybody. This is John McFarland. I'll let Jacob introduce himself.
Hi, this is Jacob Terry with CxAlloy. Happy to be here with everyone today.
So since you can't see us, you'll have to just remember our voices. Hope you can do that. So happy to be here. Sorry we can't all be together. But we will we'll do the best we can. Hope everybody is safe and healthy and your families are as well. This is AIA. I got to click through these slides. AIA makes us do this. This is the brief description that we put in there. And basically what I plan to share with you today are some techniques and some processes that I developed over a couple of projects with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I've always thought of commissioning as a quality assurance process that can be applied to virtually any part of the project, any part of the building. And so with that in mind, as I worked on these projects, I saw opportunities for growing the traditional commissioning role that that I had as an MEP commissioning authority to help the whole project be more successful overall. And I wanted to share those lessons learned, and I've certainly made some mistakes along the way, and I'm going to share those as well. I firmly believe that we learn as much from our mistakes as our successes, and it's important to share it all. So moving into the overall presentation, clearly commissioning, as you all know, is more than just testing. And so one of the things that we saw as an opportunity working with the owner and the program manager and the architect was there were tools that we were using from a commissioning standpoint, like field observation reports and tracking the issues in the manner that we do, that would be applicable to everyone. And so through the software that we use, CxAlloy, we opened it up to include everybody. And one of the challenges with doing that is trying to unify under a single project logo. And so what we did was, for this project, we used the children's logo. We've done this on other projects that the project itself created its own graphic logo for that particular project. But by having a common logo, when we generate reports, whether that be me or the architect or the civil engineer, a field observation report, it all carries the same banner, that banner being the client that we're all working for. So I thought that was important. It's like being on the same team. You all want to have the same uniform. And this helped us do that and break down barriers that might otherwise exist between companies. So no matter how you do your documentation, if you do start opening it up to other team members, I encourage everyone to use a common logo on the reports that you generate as a group. It really made for a much stronger team environment. Another thing that we found as we were working on the project was the typical disciplines that we are concerned about, things like architectural and controls and fire protection, mechanical. When you start expanding that to the civil engineer and the low voltage engineer and special inspectors, you find that you need a lot more disciplines to keep track of your issues with. And so that grew to something looking like this, where special inspectors reports, we track those through the commissioning process. So we had to include things like drilled piers and earthwork. The landscape architect, they have issues that they come up with when they make their site visits. And so we added landscaping and low voltage. We had a parking structure. So parking systems, if you've never tried to test a gate controlled parking system, I wish you all the best the first time you try to do it. They're actually pretty complicated. So we had parking issues and vertical transportation, the elevators and things like that. So that was another thing that we found as we grew the project, who was using commissioning as the quality assurance tool that it is. We had to grow the number of disciplines that we were tracking through the process. And along those lines, to keep things organized, we had to add field observation types. So rather than just the couple that we might have used internally, we created special ones so we could keep track of the special inspectors reports if we ever needed to do a report of just those, or the building envelope consultants report, or the structural engineers inspections. So I think that the key thing takeaway on these sort of first parts is, as you grow the commissioning process to include others, you have to grow the way you keep track of the things that you find along the way to keep them better organized. And so through disciplines and through field observation report types or things like that, just keep in mind how many people are going to be interacting with it, and how to best organize it for your particular project, so that the recipients of those comments, whether that be the contractors or the design professionals, or ultimately the owner, can understand how it's organized. So think through the end as you start to develop it along the way. And then this was sort of a late challenge that came in. I didn't think about this until the end of the project, when the civil engineer and the landscape architect in particular were doing their final punch list. But they have a whole site that's outside of the building that they need to keep track of where things are. And so one of the ways we carved up the site first by quadrants. In our case, the site best worked in a northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest kind of format. And then inside of the quadrants, we identified specific areas, and in this case, we had to call them floors. It's just the limitation of the system that we use, but other systems you may be able to call it area. So we had to then divide up the parts of the quadrant into specific areas, so that if an issue was identified, it could be narrowed down to a smaller part of just saying the site overall. Not something I'd ever thought I'd have to do, is how to figure out describe areas of a site. But working with the landscape architect and the civil engineer, and in particular the general contractor, we came up with what you see on the screen here. So each is going to be unique for the project, and I think it's a team effort to come up with that. And then the final thing, if you do use software to track issues as a group, especially database type software, it's important to teach those who might not be familiar with it what fields are the really important ones and which fields are the less important ones. And in our case, what I wanted everybody to understand that, one, obviously the issue description is a very important field. It's the most important one, but the assign to is the other one. And if they don't pick an assign to, they're basically not putting it in anyone's court. And so making sure that all of the different parties who were using the software online understood that it was their responsibility not only to assign it to a company or to a person, but also to communicate that assignment after they did it. I stressed with them all that the software is a tool, but it doesn't replace communication. And it's up to them to communicate with the other folks about what issue they saw and how best to get it resolved. So, that assigned to is that, to me, was the most important thing short of the issue description that they had to classify. Outside of that, the others were sort of the other things we could track are nice to haves, but not must haves. And everybody pretty much understood what I was getting across and why that it was important to do that assigned to. And then we use that assigned to as a ball in court, which comes up next, and how we managed the issues through the process. So I took on as my role on the project, as it grew from just the MEP commissioning to more of a quality assurance overall role, tracking all of those issues as they go work through the process and helping the team get them resolved. So additional scope for me, but ultimately it helped the project as a whole get the issues resolved. And so this ready for verification and the assigned to field management came very important. Ready for verification is a term that we use at my office when an issue is now ready for us to go out and check to see that it's been resolved. So we might have identified an issue, we communicated it, the receiving party went out, looked at it, agreed it was an issue, took steps to fix it. They then changed the issue status to ready for verification. We knew, okay, now it's time for us to go and check next time we're out there. So in the past, we never worried about changing the assigned to field. However, when it's not just your own company identifying issues, but it's 5 or 6 or 8 different companies and their individuals identifying issues, signing them to the general contractor changes them back to ready for verification, we had to use that assigned to as the ball in court. And so I would go in and look at ready for verification issues and look to see who created them and then reassign them back to the originating company. And the example on the screen here, the individual who created it works for WorkingBuildings. So when it changed to ready for verification, I changed the assigned to back to WorkingBuildings from whomever it might have been prior to that. I did that for all of the team members. So special inspectors, I would reassign them the issues for them to go and close, which I'll tell you was kind of an interesting new adventure for special inspectors because they weren't used to having to go back and close issues that they identified. They kind of had more the mentality of fire and forget. They identified the issue. It was up to the contractor to fix it. And they never thought that they would need to go back and confirm that it was resolved. But the owner made it clear that, to everybody identifying issues, it's their responsibility. If they think it's important enough to flag it as an issue, it's important enough for them to go back and confirm that it was fixed to their satisfaction. So that was a bit of a learning curve for some of the new team members using this kind of thorough issue tracking process. But at the end of the day, it worked. It's worked well. worked well enough to take it from one project to the next and take it on to another one. And I've seen that the team members that were involved on one of those projects took it to a whole nother project that different owner. They saw it as being very successful. So that's a bit of it's a bit of a work process. It doesn't take too long to do. I'll just share with you, I did it about once a week. I did not do it every day. I felt like once a week was often enough for me and for the project. The other thing, if you use a software, in particular, the one we use, the CxAlloy, it's got a auto filter feature called my design issues, my construction issues. So by changing the assign to back to whoever needs to go and close it up, allows them to use those same auto filters to quickly identify what issues are both ready for verification and assigned to them to close. So little time-saving feature in the field that we employed, and I showed others how they could do it, and they appreciated the time saving. Jacob, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say I'm going to take advantage of my role as co-presenter here, and I posted a question, but I thought I would just ask it directly. Did you have, this is, as you pointed out, an unusual process, at least from what I've seen, where you've got the special inspectors and other participants, creating their own issues within the system. Was there ever a problem that you had where someone was closing out an issue that they shouldn't have? Or sort of on the other side, did you ever have an issue where, or a problem, I should say, perhaps, where an issue created by, let's say, a special inspector or someone else on the team was then followed up on or potentially closed out by the commissioning authority, and they felt like that the commissioning authority was infringing into their area or something like that? Were there any of those problems?
Fortunately, no. So to your first point about someone closing an issue that they didn't originate, the software CxAlloy doesn't allow that unless you've given somebody the permission to do that. So it's not actually even possible for, if an architect creates an issue, for the civil engineer to close it unless the architect gave them the right to close that issue by giving them the permission. So the only people who have sort of that carte blanche rights are whoever effectively owns the software for the project, which in this case was my team, WorkingBuildings. So yes, I had the ability to close anybody's issues if I wanted to. What I more often had was not so much stepping on someone's toes and closing their issue and them saying, hey, I don't think it was fixed, was more them saying, I'm not exactly sure how to close the issue, but I looked at it and it's good. Can you do it for me? So I got a lot of, I'd more often get those requests to do something for somebody, which if they send it to me in an email, I usually just typed in the comment per email from so-and-so on such and such date. They said the issue is resolved, and then I would close it. That just covered me for why I was doing it and not them. But overall, most people, once they got the hang of it, they got into closing issues on their own. And I would periodically just have to remind them that they had issues out there ready for verification, and gentle reminders is more of what I had to do than anything else. But Jacob, I definitely want you to talk about this next one, because you're the one who showed me this aspect of the software that, in particular, that we use here at WorkingBuildings.
Sure. Yeah. So this is just a capability that I know you had mentioned to me on a prior presentation that we did of this, that this was something that was really valuable to you, to be able to take your portfolio of projects that you've run through the system over time and be able to filter it down in different ways. So, and you can sort of correct me if I get this wrong, but basically, when you're putting those proposals in and you want to be able to reference the prior work of that nature that you've done, or specifically with a given client, for example, it can be challenging at times to remember that project 5 years ago that didn't we do one with this company, or am I getting all of them, or am I picking from the best ones? So from what you told me, this was a big help to you, that you could go in there to your list of projects and say, show me all the projects where company X was affiliated with it, and get that list, and then be able to, whether it's all of those or selecting some of the ones that felt the most pertinent from that list, to be able to make sure you're highlighting those in the proposal that you sent out, which I was very happy to hear that was useful to you. I was lightly involved in development of this. We didn't have the proposals side of things in mind, particularly when we did this, but I was glad to hear that it was so helpful.
Yeah, and to elaborate on this one, I wish we could all be in the same room, because I'd ask you to raise your hands. How many times have you had your marketing team or your business development team asked you, how many times have you worked with Acme Architects? How many different projects have we done with Acme Architects, because they're the ones working on this project? And you start thinking through in your head, and you're like, oh, well, they weren't the client, but we worked with them on, and you're trying to remember. And I don't know about you, but my memory's getting worse and worse. And when Jacob told me about this, I was like, hallelujah, this is fantastic. If I take the time on the start of a project to put every company that I'm working with on that project into the system, then on the back end, I now can go and find out how many times I've worked with each one of those companies, which projects, that sort of thing. So it was far better than anything that I could have ever gotten out of our accounting system. So anyway, it was oh my goodness. And actually just this week, one of my project managers here called me and said, how many times have we worked with XYZ Architect? That's literally not their name, but and I went straight to the system, pulled it up, said, this is what this shows. So he was like, wow, didn't know we could do that. So coming up with some way to track that, whether that's through a database or something, came very valuable. All right. So another thing that I ended up getting plugged in on, and I had no idea this was ever going to happen to me, was room signage. So one of the projects that I worked with children's on, over 900 rooms in the building, a lot of rooms. It's medical office building, so a lot of patient rooms or exam rooms. So that was one thing that I ended up helping the project management team in particular with room signage, verifying that. Another thing that I developed over the course of a couple of projects was the O&M manual development process, and that project closeout. And then the last was how to get the data into the owner's FM software. So I'm going to hit them in this order, and Jacob's going to help me through on some of the aspects with how I did this with our commissioning database. But let me first sort of paint the picture on the room signage challenge. And it became, and I learned a lot, and I'm going to share with you those things that I've learned. But first was getting the room and the space information from the architect into Excel. So room numbers and plan names, and then manipulating that to create the space name, which I created it by room number and then plan name, but I'll go ahead and share with you, don't add the plan name, just keep the room number. Plan name complicates things, and it doesn't, there's better ways to track that. But then adding things like what message would be on the sign and what room number would be on the sign. And so this, again, when I would love to raise my hand and say, how many of you had a project that at the end of the project, the owner came in and renumbered all of the rooms from what's shown on the architectural drawings? I imagine there's some heads nodding and some hands would be going up. It's happened to me on a lot of projects. And it happened on this project. So getting those sign numbers as an attribute was critical. But then what we did was we created a checklist, a very simple checklist, because we had 900 rooms and we wanted to make sure we got the right sign on the correct room. And that's more complicated than it sounds, but made a very simple checklist, batched that to all of the spaces. So it auto-populated all of that information, the space number, the room number, the sign message. And then we used those checklists in the field to verify the signs were correct. Jake, why don't you talk about kind of what this screen is?
Yeah, so you used the word attribute a minute ago, which is a little bit specific, perhaps, to the software here, where that information that you were getting in that Excel format, and then you brought in, you were able to bring in these additional values for a given space. So yeah, it had a name and what building it was in, but then you were also able to bring in these additional attributes down here, like near the bottom of your screenshot, room name on these plans, the room number, the room size message, right? And the way the system works, you can have whatever custom attributes that you want to have defined. So some of these are clearly specific to this particular project, like the 13A series plans one. And then because you can have the information here, you can tie the data that's here over to your checklist and ask in the checklist to either verify or correct this information. And so, based on my understanding of what you all put together was to do that, right? You have the data here clearly. Yep. The checklist said, hey, these are the values. And I think probably some of these you didn't have up front, right? So some of them, it was blank to start with, and then the task in the checklist was to record it, at which point it would update the related space. Right. I'm sure in other times the situation was merely to confirm the value that you already had because of data you'd imported earlier. But either way, you're able to connect those two so that at the end of this process, you had all the spaces with all of that related information, and all of it had been verified by someone executing a checklist to record it or verify it. So that's right. Yeah, which is, I'll say is, it's exciting to see, again, like I was saying earlier, some of this functionality that you're leveraging here. Never had the idea of room signage verification as part of how it might get used, but it's really neat to see it get leveraged that way.
Yeah, so here's the checklist template. You can see it's very simple. 2 lines is all we needed for what we needed to do here, but of course it could get expanded. If the architect would say, well, I'd like to also verify, did they install the right paint color? Is it the right floor finish? If those are attributes related to a room, you could easily create, through this system at least, you could easily create a checklist to verify that. So at the end of the day, the checklist looks something like this. Here you can see it's, the room, and then we just took a picture, and you can see, we're supposed to verify the room sign message is exam 27, and sure enough, it says exam 27 is the room number 5330. Yep, room number is 5330. We're good. So that's what the completed checklist kind of looked like. But along the way, we found mistakes. We found things that had the wrong sign. We had the message was incorrect, or perhaps the architectural drawing ended up being incorrect, and so that was the issue. But as we found those going through with the checklist, it was easy to create the issue, easy to communicate that to the contractor, to get a new sign made, get a new sign installed, and then close up the issue. What led me to create this is I was talking with the program manager who's responsibility this was going to be to verify all of the signs in this building were correct. So this was not verifying room signage was not scope for me, but it was scope for somebody else. And in talking with her, she said, well, I've got the signage drawings, and you can see those kind of in the top right corner there, and it shows, you know, what the sign message is. Well, it shows the sign tag number, which is not the room number. It's just the sign tag number. Think of it like an equipment number. And then on a separate sheet, the drawing sheet, you would then look up in the schedule and you'd see, okay, you know, the tag is 5021. Okay, that's supposed to be exam 25, room 5326. All right, but that's on a whole separate sheet. But as you can tell, it's sometimes kind of hard to tell what part of the building you're in, so you might have to juggle the actual architectural sheets along the way. So she was going to be out there juggling 3 different sheets, whether she's got them physically or in some sort of electronic thing like FieldWire or PlaneGrid or somebody like that. Who knows? But she's still juggling them, all trying to verify this thing. And I told her, I was like, look, I think we can come up with a little bit better way. And that's where the checklist came in. She was able to walk out with just the checklist on her iPad and click through and quickly go through and verify and then verify corrections and all of that. So huge time saver for her. Didn't take me initially a whole lot of time. It ended up taking a little bit more time just because of some of the things I learned along the way. One was get the signage data in Excel, not a PDF. So make it a point of the signage vendor to provide that in Excel, not just a PDF file. One other thing we learned would have saved her some time was make the checklist, have the signage installation contractor complete the checklist. That way they know they've done it right to begin with, and that way they don't have to go back and fix something after the fact. And then the last thing there is settle on the room numbering early in the project, so you're not trying to change numbers late in the game. As much as you can with your clients, talk to them about doing that. It's a strange thing to talk about, but from a mechanical, electrical, plumbing standpoint, your equipment is tied to those same room numbers, so it's important for the traditional commissioning as well. So those are some lessons we learned.
Hey, John,
Yep.
I don't know, I don't think you might not have seen it. There was a question that came through about, and I wanted to just thought we'd address it before you moved on.
Sure, yeah.
You know, it says, did you take the room number list to verify the mechanical plan room number and the EMS room number and electrical plan room number? You know, did you do some sort of cross-checking like that?
Yeah, looking at the question now. So all of those rooms did have a sign. So that was part of the verification on the sign. But I see what they're asking. Did we confirm breaker tags? We did not take it to that level on this project, but that's a great idea that with the data, and then you start linking that to the electrical panels, you could confirm that they've got the right room numbers on the electrical panel schedule, and for the breaker tags themselves. So, but we did certainly verify that the mechanical room numbers were all in there correctly and labeled correctly. We also, and then we'll get into this a little bit later, we started assigning all of the equipment that's on the floor of the building to the specific room that it's located in, not just onto the floor level, but actually saying what room the VAV box is physically located in. And that comes up in a little bit when I talk about transition to operations. Great question and great idea. Thanks, Thomas. All right, so receiving, reviewing, publishing O&M manuals. Now, again, we use software called CxAlloy, but there's probably other software out there that would do something along these lines. But I brought to the construction team an idea about a better way to potentially create the O&M manuals, and presented it to them and asked them if they wanted to give it a try. And They all nodded their heads and said yes. And I told them I'd never done it before. Were they still willing to give it a try? And keep in mind, this is not contractually, this is not in the specs that they had to do it the way I was suggesting. And they all nodded their heads yes again. So I realized that whatever they do right now is a really painful process. So here's a quick little flow chart that I created that kind of shows what we did and the process. So first step was creating a checklist for each equipment type for what is required in the O&M manual for that equipment type: air handlers, chillers, generators, pumps, whatever it might be. So we did that. Then the contractors would upload those documents to each line item in the checklist. Once they got that checklist complete, they changed the status. We then would take that document and we would create as a PDF. We sent that to the general contractor, who uploaded it into the architect's submittal review process, because it is a formal submittal. And so that went to the engineer and the owner and of course ourselves along the way for review. If it was approved, then we would change the checklist status to approved, and the O&M manual was created. If it wasn't approved, we would send it back, take out the offending documents that might have been uploaded, the ones that were incorrect. Contractor re-upload the correct stuff, goes back through the process until we get it right. So that's in general the process that we created, and I'm glad you'll get these slides so you can look at it in more detail. And there's probably some ways this could be improved, and I'd love to hear those if you come up with them. What we were able to do then is track those O&M's manuals as they were getting completed. So we started this very early in the project. In fact, we had the O&M manual complete 6 months before the building reached substantial completion. So that was huge, that we were able to actually get the O&M manual that early. I mean, it's the first time I've ever gotten on a project I got an O&M manual that early. But during our commissioning meetings, we kept reminding the contractors as to how far along they were, and they kept doing it. So we were able to track it, which was important. They were able to do it in parts and pieces. They didn't have to wait until they had everything to submit. They would submit one equipment type at a time, which allowed it easier for all of us to review. Much easier to review a small document than get a 10,000-page O&M manual electronically and try to review it. Checklist often was very simple. And this is the example for the fire pump. Basically upload these different parts of the O&M for each of the different parts of the fire pump. They did that. They attached the files, and that's how we were able to track completion. That's how they were able to track it. It's easy for them to upload it, and it put it all in one spot. You can see the file is there, fire pump. And then Jacob, here's you tell everybody about the report generator.
Yeah, so the way that this worked out is that you were having the folks upload the the files to those individual lines, which were actually inside of the checklist. But you were then able to use this report generator. So this is a functionality of the software, allows you to build out these sort of custom configurations for what a report would look like. You can see here in the screenshot it's got a custom title page and a table of contents and so forth. But the checklist, sort of that bottom of those four content areas that are defined, you can see on John added the checklist area. He limited it down to only the ones that had the type O&M manual. This is sort of interesting. I see, John, that you probably created a couple of different configurations, right? Because this one's just for electrical. So you probably had another one that was mechanical O&M manuals, yep, which would include the checklist section with the mechanical checklist with type O&M manual. And then what all those files that you attach, those O&M manuals that actually got uploaded, part of the output that the system creates is including those, there's the checklist itself, the content, the questions being asked and the answer and who answered and all that. But then those attached files were part of what was included in the output here, so that you were, it's basically automating the process that in past times, and maybe some of the folks here on the call and the webinar have experienced this, manually sort of combining PDF files. I've got, I wouldn't say nightmares, but I've got some bad memories about the various dialogues of Adobe Acrobat, which, it's in many ways a great program, but of like 1,000 files listed in there and trying to combine them and waiting for like 5 hours. I'm perhaps going a little too far back here, but it's like, I'm thinking about back when the laptops had, 1 gig of RAM if you were lucky, and how difficult that was. But so it basically automates that process, right? So instead of having to, it sort of leverages two things here from my view. Instead of having to collect these from all these disparate sources, and some of them got emailed to you, and some of them are from links to a Dropbox link, and someone having to pull all those down and then do that combined process I was talking about. You have everyone go to the same central place to upload them in the first place, right? Into those checklists that you set up, and then you automate the combination of them, plus with some ability to filter, like you're doing, to get the actual output back out. So, I could see that this would be something pretty effective. Did you do a change order for this work? You mentioned that it wasn't in the scope, it wasn't in the, it wasn't part of the spec. Did you all? Because it sounds like it didn't add too much time, but some. How did you handle that side of it?
Yeah. So the short answer is no, I didn't, and it didn't take that much time. The checklist is fairly straightforward, and generating the output was once I had the template set up, it was easy to create the reports, to run the reports, and then create them. And we already had time in our project for reviewing the O&M manual, so effectively we used some of that to do these extra things. But what it allowed us to do was better use the time that we did have budgeted to really review the parts of the O&M manual that were the most important parts to review. Part of our job is to make sure that the O&M manual is complete, and by doing this, I'm helping to make sure the O&M manual is complete. The output ended up, this is just a couple of the first 2 pages, but the output had the table of contents, and it was organized by those checklists. So each type, effectively each piece of equipment was there, and that's how we created O&M manuals. It was remarkably successful. We did this on one project. We went to the next project, had a slightly different team, but the same mechanical contractor, and presented the same concept to that team. And before I could really say much, the mechanical contractor's project manager spoke up, and he said, "This saved us all kinds of time on the last project. I highly recommend we do it again on this one." And so we did. But we learned some things, and so value added, earlier creation of the O&M manuals, and better understanding of what's in there, what's done and what's not done. Things we learned: test reports. Create a separate checklist for test reports. And electrical, there's a lot of test reports on the electrical, mega scans, high pots, all of that kind of stuff. You can think of it on the mechanical side. You have the test and balance report. Those things, some happen during the course of the project, some happen late in the project. And so don't hold up delivery of product information O&M manuals from test report information O&M manuals. So highly recommend separating out test reports to separate checklists. That way you don't have to wait on them. And one of the things that we found, especially on the electrical side, a lot of those test reports were scans of paper that they had done. And those files can get quite large. So if you've got a large project that's going to have a lot of test scanned files, you may want to divide your checklist up by floor or by system to keep the overall file size smaller. And that was just a nature of the beast, but it could happen. You start scanning files, they get big. All right, the last thing to sort of talk about is transition to operations. So the client they had selected on one project, they had already selected their O&M manual or their FM software. And I felt like as a team, we could help deliver the equipment attributes and the equipment information in a way to get that into their system. So like any good engineer, I came up with a flow chart, right? That's what we do. So walk you through this real fast, kind of what the aspects of it, and then sort of, we talked about sort of the lessons learned along the way. First, we had to get the equipment data. Excel is always the best way to get it. So I tried to get some from the engineer in Excel. I was able to get some, wasn't able to get all. I still feel like nobody uses Revit the way Revit potentially could be used. So that's a challenge for the industry. But getting the data into Excel, main things you need, obviously the equipment tag, what type, where it's located, and as much other information as you can. So one thing that can come up sometimes is you might have an engineer who's designing, who doesn't tag every piece of equipment uniquely, like a VAV box. He or she might just tag them VAV-06, 08, 10, 12, 14 based on the size, and they're all the sixes are all tagged the exact same thing. So what do you do? Well, if you can't get the engineer to actually uniquely tag them, then ultimately you're going to have to wait until the mechanical contractor uniquely tags them, because somebody's got to tag them. At some point in the game, somebody's got to tag them, because the facilities maintenance team needs to know where each one is, and it has to be uniquely tagged. So thinking about the end in mind, getting everything uniquely tagged is hugely important. And hopefully you can get it done at the design level. If not, you got to get it done at the contractor level. But once you have that information, you can import that. You can start to create checklists with those linked attributes. And at the same time, you can start asking the contractor and the vendor to start giving you their data also in Excel, things like manufacturer, model number, that sort of thing. You can then pull that in, updating those fields, create those checklists. Contractors can confirm that in the field. When we create our test procedures, we'll also include some of those linked attributes. And then when we do our test, we'll double check those linked attributes. So that's kind of the process overall. And I know that's a lot to take in. So let me just go ahead and Jacob and I will talk through some of these things. And Jacob, this next one is I think for you to sort of talk on from the FM side.
Yeah. So this is great. So the story here that John, you shared before with me is, that you got together with some of the different stakeholders and said, hey, what are the actual, for a given type of equipment, what are the pieces of information that are important to be tracking, and that are going to be something that you're going to want in your CMMS system or your facility maintenance system. And so that is where you arrived at this matrix here of, which of these attributes are needed for what kinds of equipment. And I thought this was great, because one of the things that, one of the sort of traps that I occasionally see folks fall into when they adopt commissioning software, which, especially if you're coming from an approach of Excel and Word and so forth, you can get kind of almost over eager perhaps with some of the capabilities and sort of new functionality or new things that you could potentially do because of the software. And so sometimes we see people go down the line of, I'm going to record everything now, right? Like I'm going to have my checklist is going to ask for 100 different data points. And we're going to record it all. It's going to update all the equipment, and you really don't want to do that because there are, I mean, it's perhaps obvious, but there's some real cost to that, right? It's even if it's sort of the setup, of course, the administrative burden of it. There's just sort of a psychological cost, right? Sometimes it can be challenging to sell contractors on filling out checklists in general, or adopting a new system or various things like that. You don't want to add to the burden by saying, hey, and we also want you to record 30 more values than you have historically or you normally would. So you really want to make sure that you're focused on just the information that someone's actually going to want and is actually going to be put to some use. And so this approach that you came up with, John, to sort of have that meeting or as part of a meeting to have this discussion, I think was great. And it's kind of the best of both worlds, right? Leverage because the goal here is to end up with a set of equipment data that can be transferred over to their CMMS system, to the facility maintenance system, with the information and data that is pertinent to them without putting any excessive or undue burden on the contractors or anyone else on the team to actually record it. So I think it's a great approach and the right one to take.
Yeah, you can bite off more than you can chew if you go after every single possible thing you can track on a piece of equipment. You can sort of see here on this graphic clearly what are the most important things, and manufacturer model number, serial number, are the three most important, because with those you can ultimately, or anyone could ultimately go back and get all the other information that they could need by contacting the manufacturer with that serial number. And that manufacturer in this day and age will have a database that has the rest of the information. If the rest of the nameplate got scratched off or something like that. So identifying that, sitting down with your owner, identify that, helps manage your own, as Jacob said, your own psychological health, well-being. Getting that, so here's an example of a checklist, getting that piece of it, that data in here, and you can see in this system, when we have that in ahead of time, all the recipient of this checklist, the one who's filling it out, has to do sometimes is just confirm something. If we already know the model number, all they need to do is confirm that they've got the right model number. This is also a great way to make sure that if they use it, if the team being in this case, part of the team is this contractor, their installer. If they send somebody to go to fill out this checklist and it's a different model number than what it's shown on the checklist, then maybe somebody installed the wrong thing there. So they could create their own issue that, as a group, we then track down. Did the model number change from the time that we learned what it was supposed to be to what got actually shipped? Or did the wrong model get installed in the spot, and we need it's somewhere else? The funny story on that, and this dates back to my earliest days of doing commissioning, we started checking the fire alarm, the strobes on a project, and we were finding that they weren't matching with what was shown on the drawing. And the guy checking it came to me. He's like, John, I've checked about half of them, and it's just kind of random whether it's right or wrong. And so I said, well, he said, I'll check the rest of them in a bit. I'm like, no, wait a second. Went to the fire alarm contractor, their foreman, and showed him what we were doing. And he said, candela rating? What are you talking about? We just pull it out of the box and put it on the wall. And we showed him, and he was like, oh, huh. And so he went back, and at the end of the day, they just put him on the wrong spot. So that was before we had these fancy checklists and stuff, but something like this could have helped that. This just shows you how it gets completed. And then test template, and we got a pretty typical one. Well, as part of our verification, we're going to check these 3 things. We're not necessarily going to check everything else, but we're going to make sure that the manufacturer, the model number, and the serial number were recorded correctly. So when we show up to do the test, if the checklist was filled out, then all we're doing is confirming that. And, you know, sometimes when people are typing in things in the field, O's can look like zeros and E's can become 3s and 5s can become S's real easily when you're typing it in the field. So by us coming back and checking it one more time, we can catch those typos, so to speak, and get them corrected. And they happen. Happened on this project. I found a couple of just like that. Or sometimes it's hard to count how many zeros there are actually in that serial number. Is it 4 or is it 7? They add up. So along the way, what did we learn? Back to what getting that data in Excel in as many along the way is the most important thing. And I'll continue to say that if the engineers are designing it, they should have that data in Excel. Whether that's in their design spreadsheets that they might be using, or if they do use Revit, they can put it into Revit, and Revit can output Excel. I know it's not necessarily as easy as the companies would like to say it is, but you can get it out. But getting that data in Excel, getting it from the vendors in Excel, the vendors can provide the model number. Obviously, they can provide the manufacturer. Maybe they can provide some other bits of information along the way, like how many filters the air handler has, what filter sizes are coming, because those are important things for the operations team when they start to build out their preventative maintenance procedures to know things like filter size, filter quantity, that sort of thing. And that, yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, before you wrap up, I just wanted to put in my lessons learned from not this particular project, but being involved with similar sort of efforts. And you didn't really talk on this, but ultimately the goal here, your title, Transition to Operations, was to have this data, move over to the owner's FM system and have that work, right? And the thing that I've seen at times is, how do you know that that's going to work, right? So in this particular case, you knew the mechanisms of the system of CxAlloy that you happen to be using here well, and you knew that you could get this equipment data out in a certain format, in an Excel format, and so forth, if as long as you record it in a certain way. But is the other system that it's going to come into, is it going to accept it, and is that going to work, and are we going to get the end result that we expect? And my recommendation is you want to do a dry run, a sample run of some subset of the data, ideally, end to end, right? You want to do the entire process that you plan to do in miniature, right, on just a little sample, to make sure that you're going to get the end setup that you want. Because what I've seen at times is there are some promises made that maybe it's just a miscommunication. Maybe it's not. I'm a vendor, but vendors always like to put themselves in the best light, right? So you need to make sure you validate that, and you need to say, okay, they're saying that this can work. They're saying that they've got an export and this other system can import, and it's all going to work. You need to make sure that, especially before you put all the time and effort into your process, you want to make sure that it's the right process and it's going to get you the results you want. Because the last thing you want to do is have put this whole thing in place, get to the end, it doesn't get you the results you wanted. Maybe it's some minor tweak you could have made, and it would have gotten there, but you didn't do the test run, so you didn't know that. So that's just my 2 cents, my lessons learned from being involved in some of these, to say, make sure you do a trial run of that situation all the way through to the other product or the FM system, to make sure that it gets you where you want to go.
Great final point, Jacob. Thank you. And with that, we are at time. So thank you all for being here and for participating. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll all get through this at some point. And appreciate you being on the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you, John and Jacob. I just want to close things out by thanking the presenters once again and all of our members who joined us across all 3 organizations. Please keep an eye out for an email regarding your learning unit from the CxEnergy app. And while you're in the app, we're also asking all participants to evaluate these presentations. We hope to see you again next week for the next webinar in the series titled Healthcare Emergency Power Supply Systems Commissioning, Clearing Communication Hurdles, taking place May 21st at 2 p.m. This same time next week. Have a great day, everyone.